right, welcome everybody from me and my dog Muggsy. I knew that would happen. You are here with me, Jen Allen Knuth, and Women in Sales. Now, if you're not familiar with Women in Sales, Alexine Moudwar is also in the chat. She is the CEO and founder, and she was the one that invited me to participate today. Women in Sales is a phenomenal group I got exposed to earlier this year. I'm now a formal advisor for them. And for those of you that this is your first interaction, Women in Sales is all about elevating, empowering, and promoting women within the sales profession, as well as our male allies. So there are a few companies we just want to mention that are partners of Women's Sales that make things like this happen so that we can do a lot of things for free for those that participate. So those companies are AirMeet, Aligned, Apollo IO, Aspireship, Chili Piper, Comsor, DemandBase, Motive, QuotaPath, Rework Training, Unifor, WorkLife, and Vidyard. So lots of love for those companies who helped us put this on today. Now, I am so excited for today. This is by far one of my favorite things to talk about, not because I am some sort of cold email expert, but rather because when I was an AE, for those of you that don't know me, I spent about 18 years as an individual contributor, not a sales manager, not a leader. I just loved staying on the IC track. And I probably wrote some of the world's absolute worst cold emails. And so much of what I'm sharing with you today is not my opinion. It's actually grounded in a ton of research studying what drives up or down replies. But I can also speak to just beliefs and assumptions that I held that caused me to say and do certain things in emails that now looking back, I wish I would have changed, because since changing it, it's helped me get more meetings, book more replies. So my style is very, very casual, if you haven't noticed already. If you have a question, if you have a violent disagreement, if you're like, what are you talking about? That makes no sense. Please put it in the Q&A. Alexine's going to be going through and monitoring it and calling it out if there's any of those that we want to address in the moment. And then my last request before we get into it, if you are brave enough, and I know some of y'all are, to share a cold email that you've been using that you haven't been loving the success of, please drop it in the Q&A, which you'll find on the right-hand bar. And I've carved out time at the end to do some rewrites. If no one wants to do it, that's okay. No pressure. I've got one pre-teed up already. But if you do want to have your email kind of rewritten or edited, I'm happy to do it. I'll probably have time for about one. So all that said, let's get into it. We've got a lot of fun ahead of us. Let's go ahead. Today, it's all about how to break through our buyer's mental spam filter. Now, as I mentioned, this is an event put on by Women in Sales. I'm Jen of DemandJen, and in our time together today, we're going to do 5 things. 1, some of you may be looking at the words buyer's mental spam filter and saying, Jen, what the hell is that? So we're going to unpack what that is. We're going to have a little fun with it in the beginning. 2, I love the term unlearning. I don't think any of us wake up in the beginning of the day and say, my goal today is to write a bunch of terrible emails that piss off my buyers, right? We all have really good intentions. We all want the same things. But in sales, a lot of what we do is dictated by beliefs or assumptions that we have from experiences, something we read, something we saw. And so my hope is what I share with you today will actually break some of those beliefs and assumptions and open up new ones. Then we're going to talk about thinking like a buyer. This, in my opinion, I spent most of my career in the sales effectiveness space. This is something that is often very underserved in companies. We talk a lot about our selling process, our selling motion, but sometimes we don't really look at things from the buyer's perspective. So I'm going to introduce a framework that I hope will be helpful, which is called observation hunting. It's a very buyer-friendly approach to get an executive's attention. And then lastly, as I said, we've got an email rewrite teed up, but if you want to submit yours, go ahead and throw it in the chat. The most important thing I want to say today is not about criticizing anyone. It is not about criticizing your work. Today is meant to be helpful. The thing that lights me up is seeing sellers who've been really working at targeting an account land that big meeting. And my hope is every single time I've run this, we've had those outcomes. My hope is today you're one of those people that gets that too. So without further ado, to start us off, I hope most of you, although I might be aging myself, have seen the movie Taken. If you haven't, the like rotten or spoiled tomatoes version of it, whatever it's called, rotten tomatoes, not spoiled tomatoes version, is Liam Neeson plays this dad, and Liam's daughter gets kidnapped in the movie. And there's this famous scene, which you see here on the screen, where Liam is talking to the kidnapper and he says, I can tell you I don't have money, but what I do have are a very particular set of skills I've acquired over a very long career. You can see why I ended up in sales effectiveness and not in acting. My point is this. Our buyers are actually very similar to Liam Neeson in this movie for two reasons. Number one, they love to tell us that they don't have any money. And number two is because they actually mostly unknowingly have developed a skill over a very long career of receiving lots of seller emails and outreach. And to make that point, we're going to have a little fun. Now, this is the one of the few times I'm going to ask you to really lean in on the chat. The next slide I share is going to have a question on it and an image. In that image, you will see 10 emails. As soon as you think you know the answer to the question, I want you to write it in the chat. There is no penalty for wrong answers. This is all about having some fun. So, ready to go. Get your fingers ready. 10 emails. How many of these 10 emails are sales emails? Okay, now I can't see what's happening in the chat, but hopefully y'all have put in some answers by now. I will tell you, I ran this session for about 150 CROs back in June and then back in September. And within seconds, they guessed the correct answer. And the correct answer to this is 10. Now, what you'll notice here is these actually are not the full email, right? This is just what we see. This is in Gmail, but this is the subject line and the preview text that shows up in our inbox. Now, when you look at this, I'm sure many of you are picking up on this already. There's a few clues that signal and kind of scream sales emails. So, one, the use of my name in the subject line. Now, back 4 years ago, this was like the move, right? If you put someone's first name in a subject line, it was like, there's no way this was sent to a bunch of people. This has to be for me. It's a great example of something that used to work, but now with automation, you can blast that out to hundreds and thousands of prospects. It is no longer a signal that this is an email to one person. So that's one flag, one clue. Number two, look how many of these emails start with I or our. Now, this is straight out of my inbox. I didn't pick and manipulate this. This is just a screenshot that I took of my inbox back when I was at my last role. I hope this message finds you well. Our community, I wanted to send you. I emailed. I hope Q1 was great. I hope your week is going well. I hope you're doing. We've all heard you're not supposed to start an email with, I hope this finds you well. But I think many of us don't get the context of seeing why. And that's because we don't live in our buyer's inbox. Many of us haven't even seen our executives' inboxes, which I think is a miss, and I'd love to see more executives doing it. It is not because the words, I hope you're well, is bad. It's well-intentioned. But when you look at a screenshot like this and you zoom out, it starts to become really evident why people get so irritated with it, because it's often the starting point of a cold email. And even if we drop the hope you're well type stuff in there, notice the number of I's and hours in here. Sorry, you're gonna have to bear with me with my dogs. So I, our, I. That signals that this email is about me, not about my recipient. So that's another clue. And then we see emojis. We see things like ROI. These are all basically setting off what we call the mental spam filter. So here's what the mental spam filter is. So the mental spam filter is basically this skill that our executives have acquired. Now, many of them don't even know that they had it. When I presented this to that room of CROs, they were like, gosh, I never realized I do this, but I 100% do this. It is not the physical spam filter that we always think about and know not to send unsolicited links and pictures and all of those things. It is these cues that signal to an executive that this is an uninvited piece of email. And so to give you some data to kind of back this up, What Litmus, an organization that does research on email, found was most emails are actually deleted within 3 seconds. Now, 3 seconds is not enough to read the full email. What's happening is exactly what we did on the last page. Executives are scanning their inbox, they're looking at sender, they're looking at subject, they're looking at preview text. We're going to talk more about do's and don'ts there, but that is enough time for them to decide, do I even want to open it? So battle number one is, how do I even get the thing opened? Battle number two is the average amount of time an executive spends reading an email is down from last year. It was 10 seconds last year. It's now 9 seconds. And so what that tells us is that even if we do earn the open, in my case as an AE, like I was heavy into personalization and relevance, all these things, but I was writing like 200 word emails to show them, like, look how much I've done, look how much I care. But the reality is 9 seconds is about 37 words. And in my time at Lavender and in my time since I've left with DemandJen, I have reviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of cold emails. I can tell you on one hand the number of cold emails that are 37 words. So we're going to talk about length, but it's not because there's this magic number. It's because this is the amount of attention that we have to win from our executives. Now, if you're sitting there saying, this is exactly why I don't cold email and why did I even bother showing up today? This is pointless and it's wasted effort. Here's the good news. 96%, this is wild to me, of sales emails are actually automated. Automated means like it's like the fill in the blank, first name, title, company name. I thought it would be high. 96 is absolutely horrendous. And of the ones that are actually personalized, those emails in 2023 were receiving 1,200% more replies. That is almost ridiculous to share a stat like that. It almost feels to me like unbelievable. But I think the more interesting thing of the story is if you look at last year, personalized emails were only seeing a 100% increased likelihood of reply. So it doesn't make sense at face value if so many emails are being sent and executive time is like so precious. Why are we seeing more replies in a year where there's more noise? And I think anecdotally, one of the things that I hear when I share this with C-level executives is so few people take the time to actually make an email relevant and not about themselves that when I see it, I actually want to kind of reward that behavior. So does it guarantee you a positive reply? Nope, absolutely not. But one of the blessings that we have in sales is when someone tells us it's not the right time, I already have a supplier, because that allows us to move on to other items or more other accounts. So when we think about the mental spam filter, the reason this presentation is centered on this is because this is our battle. We have to win attention in a very noisy environment. The last thing I'll share before we talk about exactly how we do it and I start breaking into some tactics, if you haven't seen this, this is research that came out from Gong in March of this year. It was a buyer study. And the question they were asking buyers are on the left-hand side. This is about sellers who were reaching out to them. Now, there's two ways to look at this. The first is like, man, this is doom and gloom. This is so pathetic. Do I even want to be in sales if this is what buyers think of us? The second way to think about it is, this is greenfield opportunity. So what we're seeing here is only a quarter of buyers think that the seller reaching out to them even understands their role. This is like as low as the bar gets, right? No one is going to give their time to someone who they believe does not fundamentally understand their role in the buyer organization. But yet only a quarter of buyers felt that sellers reaching out to them did that. Number two, only 13% of buyers felt that the seller was addressing a relevant challenge. We're going to get deep into that later. I'm going to show you a framework for doing that more effectively. And then the last two, only 9% felt that the message was for them and them alone. And then only 6% felt that they learned something they didn't already know. I came from the challenger selling organization. It's where I spent my entire career. This breaks my like sweet little challenger heart because we have a lot to teach. We have a lot that we know. And how we frame that is really important. So, like I said, this could be doom and gloom. To me, this is a good news story because this is our opportunity to stand out and be different. Now, we're going to get into some very specific tactics, and this is the unlearning. So we're going to do unlearning, walk you through tactics, and then I'm going to start introducing frameworks from buyers' perspectives. The first one is the one that always gets the shine, right? Like everybody loves to talk about subject lines. We know subject lines are important, but most of us, like I said in the beginning, are just basing our subject lines off of our best guess as to what works, maybe something that used to work, And we don't have a ton of data that helps us understand what is the likelihood that this gets the open. So what you'll see here is kind of a short list. By the way, if anyone wants copies of these slides, so you're not like screenshotting and writing this stuff down, I'll pull up, I have my email at the end. You can email me. I'm happy to share them. But here's what we're looking at. Most important thing as it relates to subject line is actually the number of words. Now, I was massively guilty of going like 3, 4, 5, 6 words. I mean, I was basically like writing half of the email on the subject line. And I constantly get emails that look like this today. It is one of the simplest fixes you can make. The highest likelihood for an open comes from a 1 to 2 word subject line with a neutral tone. I'm going to tell you what that means in a second. Now, what you're going to see below are a bunch of things that hurt your chances at an open. Number one, if you use a question, it lowers your open rate by 56%. Think about your own junk mail or your own personal emails. Like, we see this all the time in our personal lives. So this comes across when you ask a question as a marketing email. Go back and look in your junk folders. I promise there's a ton of them in there. So kill questions. Number two, numbers lower open rates by 46%. Now, it's not to say you can never include a number in your subject line. It is to say if you're using things like 10x your pipeline accuracy, that again is screaming this is a sales or marketing email. First names, as we already talked about, it's become a recognized automation pattern. Emojis, I just put nope. Executives don't usually use emojis corresponding with one another. Commands are things like improve, respond, reply. Remember, this is a complete stranger. We would never walk up to someone at a party and say, reply to me. We would just have the conversation. Email is no different. And then when I mentioned neutral tone in the first piece here, superlatives like better, improved, accelerated. Again, these are words that scream sales. So we've got to kill them from subject lines because it's hurting the likelihood that we make that open. And lastly, I think many of us know this. Again, there's no hard and fast rule like it always works, it never works. But if you ask executives, and I've done this in lots of the sessions that I've run, like what are some of your least favorite subject lines? 15 minutes, thoughts, and quick question are almost always in the top 5. So things like this, again, it's not because these words are bad or intentionally harmful. It's just because they've become recognized clues to buyers that set off their mental spam filter. So instead, I'm going to introduce a couple frameworks that give you just an idea. Now, I'm not saying these are the only subject lines that works. I'm not saying you have to use these. But what I do want to sit here and do is make sure I'm not just saying like, don't do all these things and not tell you things that work. So there's 4 frameworks on this page. Number 1 is something called internal camo. Now, internal camo is actually meant to be intentionally boring. So when we talked about on the previous page things not to do, what we are essentially trying to do here is show up in the inbox like a peer or an executive. So if I was a CRO and I wanted my team to go in CRM and update their forecast, I would never send them an email that was like 10 times your pipeline forecast. I would just send them an email that says update your CRM. Right? So much of this is mirroring the way in which executives write themselves. That is just a clue right off the bat that this is someone that probably has earned the right to be in their inbox. So you can see some really boring subject lines. Like if I was selling a forecasting tool, I might use Q2 forecast. If I was in the manufacturing space and I was selling like, I don't know, batteries for big heavy machinery, I might say battery leakage. If I'm selling a solution that helps people avoid downtime, I might say plant downtime. All of these look like they could be sent internally. They don't set off the mental spam filter that we talked about before. So think about the key here is like, don't just pick 2 random words, but pick 2 random words that have to do with the subject matter of the email. That internal camo approach is really, really effective for at least getting the open. Number 2 is a personal favorite of mine. I use this one all the time as an AE. Now that I'm not an AE anymore, I share it with everybody because this is my favorite thing actually about this one is it forces us to write a relevant email. The subject line framework is called CEO comments. So the subject line you use is the founder or the CEO's name comments. So you can see here I did like Mary Smith's comments. Now, the most important thing I will tell you about this is do not use this and then write a bad email that's irrelevant and just all about yourself. So you'll actually probably piss more prospects off by doing that. The point is to say many of us will look at podcasts or investor presentations or an interview and spot something that the CEO is talking about that signals that they may have the problem that our solution solves for. So by using Mary Smith's comments as your subject line, you then make your first line or your preview text something like, Mary spoke about the 10 enterprise logos your team landed last quarter. Sounds like you might be moving up market. The reason I like this is that, again, it forces us to write an email about them, not about us. And it immediately shows I've done my research without asking up front, like, I read your annual report, which kind of comes across as like, hey, I'm checking the box, give me some brownie points for it. So CEO comments is one that has worked for me to book a ton of C-level meetings. And even though it could, I'm sure at some point, like many of these things, it could turn out to be like, okay, now it's overused. I still don't frequently see it. So that's my personal favorite, obviously, on the page. The rule of three. This is one I learned from Bilal Batrawi. This is actually where you take 3 words, 2 of which kind of go together, and one that's totally out of the norm, and put them in your subject line. So the example here is like vendors, spreadsheets, to pays. Notice I do have plus signs in there. You can use punctuation in this way and see it an okay reply rate or open rate. It's like when you're using question marks or exclamation points at the end that you run into trouble. So the format or the body of this email might be like, companies in this space typically manage their vendors by spreadsheets, which ends up resulting in, the owner wanting to pull their hair out. Something like that. What you're doing with this, it's less about, these 3 words, but it's more about sparking curiosity. There's a curiosity loop that humans just naturally want to see fulfilled. So if I see vendor spreadsheets to pays, it sets off this thing in my mind, like, what does to pays have to do with anything? So it's leveraging that human nature to want to fulfill the curiosity loop. And the last one is a subject preview line combo. So we're going to talk about preview text in a moment, but this is where you actually start the sentence in the subject line, staying true to the 1 to 2 words, and then in your preview text, finish the sentence. So you can see here, cash payments is the subject line. Preview text could be like, maybe slowing down your guest checkout experience. So these are just 4 frameworks. Again, I always encourage people to experiment. These are not the only 4 that works, but it can be helpful to A/B test some of these things against some of the work that you're already doing on subject lines. Next big thing. Subject lines get a lot of shine. Preview text does not. In fact, when I was a seller, I didn't even know preview text was a thing. Now, preview text is what I've shown you here. Whether it's on your phone, on your laptop, doesn't matter. When someone looks at their inbox in total, they see subject line, sender, and then they see like the first maybe, 10, 15 words of the email, depending if they're looking on their phone or if they're looking on their laptop. I never used to think about those first words. So I was certainly guilty of being like, "Hi, Jen. I hope, you had a great Thanksgiving," and then going into what I was going to say. Well, the problem is all they're seeing when they look at their inbox is, "Hi, Jen. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving," from some person they've never heard from before. The likelihood someone will open that is very low because, again, it's setting off that mental spam filter. So the key here is, this is very similar to what I just talked about with the CEO comments email. It is to immediately get to something about them that is relevant. And so when you are doing this, you can send the email to yourself and see how it shows up on your phone, see how it shows up in your inbox. But I would say you have to make those first 10 to 15 words about them, not niceties, not, "Hi, my name is Jen and I work at wherever." Get to the point quickly, because the thing I think I neglected a lot as an AE is executives aren't opening every single email being like, "Okay, what's in store for me here?" They're looking at their inbox. And to win that fight, we've got to show up differently than the thousands of other emails they're getting from others. So that's on preview text. Next, this is a busy slide, but I'm going to break down some key things that are happening in the body of the email. So, number 1, when I first heard this one, I was like, no friggin' way. You can't write a 50-word cold email. It is not possible. But if there's one thing that you work on coming out of today that will help you more than anything else, it is the length of your email. As I mentioned, I've read hundreds, if not thousands, of cold emails at this point across all different industries. And the number 1 mistake I see is that we show up in an inbox and we're like, "Brr, here you go." This just reads as effort. It also reads as kind of unkind. If I am reaching out to a stranger, I think we don't intentionally do this, but I am burdening them by not being concise and brief with my words. So if you actually make your email about 50 words, and you don't have to get to 50 on the dot, but roughly 50 words, you will see an 83% likelihood or increased likelihood of a reply. We're not talking about open rates anymore. We're talking about reply rates. The second piece you see here is mobile optimization. Just a fancy way of saying a lot of executives read emails on their phone. I remember I had a client who said, I don't even own a laptop. I do everything on my phone. I don't think you can get away with that these days. But the point here is if you write a short email on a laptop, you might see that when you send it when you read it on your phone, it actually reads like big blocky text because our laptops are like this, our phones are like this. So again, it's a good idea to send the email to yourself and take a look at, are there big blocky text chunks? So a key thing here is actually really simple. It's just spacing it out. Like write your first sentence, paragraph, write your next sentence, paragraph. It might feel really weird. It felt weird to me in the beginning, but essentially what you're doing is you're earning the right to that next sentence after every individual sentence. I will tell you, learning to write 50 to 75 word emails, like I said, doesn't always have to be right on the dot at 50, is by far one of the greatest skills I developed because writing is thinking. When we don't know what we're talking about, when we don't know what we're trying to do, I'm guilty of this too. What we do is we just put it all out there. We're like, hey, here's the whole kitchen sink. You want logos we work with, you want ROI, you want 5 problems we might solve, you want this, you want everything's in there because my hope is something slaps. That certainly was my kind of belief system is I didn't actually know what worked, so I put it all in there. But by putting it all in there, we almost guarantee that nothing gets read. So just keep in mind, your first email is not your last email. If you're on the fence about like, I don't know if it's this problem or that problem, that's okay. Break it into 2 emails. You can always send another one. So that's on length. Number 2, clarity. This one also really hard for me. Most of us probably write an 11th or 12th grade reading level. Ideal target is something that your 8 to 10-year-old could read. When you land that, increase your reply rate by 67%. So this is another big one. My easy tip here is go through your email, look for 3-syllable, 4-syllable words, kill them, swap them out with something easier. So an example would be like, instead of saying visibility, say see. We often, I speak from my own experience. I often fell into this pattern of being like, I have to impress an executive with my language. And this is how they don't talk like that. You ever read like an executive's emails? They're not flashing big fancy words. It's short, it's punchy, it's to the point. Last 2, these are 2 that will actually hurt your chances of a reply. Asking more than one question. I used to do this again quite a bit. Is this something as a focus? Are you the right person? Are you available at 10 a.m. on Friday? Well, when we ask multiple questions, we reduce the likelihood that any of them get answered. When you ask one question, we're making it easier on our reader to give us what they want. So asking more than one question hurts your chances of a reply by 26%. And then last but not least, tone. Now, tone is one now where it's like, I can't believe I didn't know this sooner. But I was, again, never intentional about thinking about it this way. One of the things that will piss buyers off more than anything else is when we show up in their inbox talking at them about their struggles and what they're failing at. I mean, you've probably seen examples of this of like, I looked at your website and this is wrong and this is wrong. When we take an assumptive or informative tone to an executive who did not ask for us to contact them, it creates this really offense-defense dynamic. So it's a situation where we could be right and still be wrong because of the way that we are messaging it. So unsure tones, this again goes against like how most people paint the role of a salesperson. Unsure tones are actually your best friend. Unsure tones sound like looks like you might be, not sure if. Simply by changing those assumptive sentences into not sure if, what we're doing is we're inviting that executive to correct us. We're also showing that we're not naive enough to think that I spent 15 minutes looking at your company. I figured out your problems and priorities better than you can. And that is the nuance that we typically give to executives when we write to them with an informative or assumptive tone. So if you've been taught, like many of us were, like you have to go in there and be confident, assertive, and aggressive, that actually might be working against us. So unsure tonality, again, another really powerful thing in the body of the email. All right. Personalization. We already talked about the improvement in reply rate that you get from personalizing, and that is this year. So this is not like 5-year-old data that I'm trying to like convince you to do something today about. But one of the biggest things that I see sellers get wrong with personalization, and this is definitely true with like a lot of the AI automated services now, is it's like I'm personalizing it just to be like, hey, I checked the box. Like an example for me was I went to Penn State. I'm the world's worst alumni. Like you will never book a meeting with me because I went to Penn State. Some executives might, but it's not for me. I get messages all the time that are like, we are Penn State. Anyway, we're the number one provider. And it's like the motion there is just like, look, I checked the box, but it doesn't have anything to do with the body of the message. So there will be times when you are looking at your target executive and you'll say, oh, there's this thing that I actually really do care about. So for me, I am like, my biggest obsession is dog rescue. So if someone looked at my LinkedIn profile and saw that I volunteer at a dog shelter and they use that up front and say like, saw you volunteered at Evanston Animal Shelter. Anyway, we're the leading provider of whatever. It just leaves a really sour taste in the reader's mouth. So in those instances, use it in a PS. So this is only used by 4% of sellers. But when you use this in a one-on-one email, this does not work if you use a mass blast automated campaign, you see an increased likelihood of a reply by 26%. So what that does is when an executive looks at their email, we already talked about it, in their inbox, they're looking at sender, subject, preview. If I win that, I open it, I probably read the first line, and then what do? I scroll to the bottom. And instead of seeing a booking link or do you have 15 minutes free, what I see is something sincere that shows that the person showed some interest in me, but isn't using it to be like, look at me, I did personalization. So an example might be PS, noticed you volunteer at an animal shelter. My dogs, Koa and Muggsy, are both rescues. Love to see it. Like that is a very human touch that isn't being used as a bait. So again, just based on how executives scan their emails, it's a really powerful way. If you do find one of those things where it's like, I do have something in common, like I want to share it, but I don't want it to feel forced. It's the PS. And then last but not least, before we kind of like pick around in an example email, a few more things here. Call to action. This is one I always get questions about. I am not saying that asking for time is a bad thing and it never works. As we talked about before, nothing always works, nothing never works. However, when you look at how an executive scans their email, more often than not, that mental spam filter is looking for your calendar link or the 20, 15, 30, whatever number of minutes you're using to tell them it is a sales email. So if you use it, recognize you're a little bit at risk for not even having the email read. More human, I think of it like I met my husband on Bumble, which is an online dating site for anyone that just met their husband organically. It would be a little bit like if I match with someone and I immediately ask them to get married. Like our job of emails, and this is something I had to learn along the way, it's not to say like, can I book a meeting? My job with a cold email is to say, is there problem alignment? And so before I ask for the meeting, the marriage, the wedding day, like my actual job is to figure out, is this even a problem worth solving for this executive and create some curiosity there. So if you've consistently used booking links or, are you free on X day at X time? I would encourage you to A/B test pulling that out. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying you run the risk of getting caught in that mental spam filter. So some alternatives might be like open to seeing more, not sure if you're seeing this, things like that again, play off that unsure tonality, but don't force someone into feeling like your goal is just to get time with them regardless. Number 2, links, images, attachments. Lots of, published research here. My philosophy on this is like, there's already so much risk in a cold email. Don't add to it, right? An attachment is, especially if you're sending into enterprise, is more than likely to get flagged. If you have to send an attachment on your first email, it means that you don't have clarity of thought, right? Use your first email to gain permission to send that, like open to seeing more. Great. Then you send it over. It's an invited piece of content. I see this a lot with people, particularly founders actually, who are just like so excited to be like, look at all the great things we can do, but we haven't really earned the right yet. Links and images, even in your auto signature, by the way, like plain text auto signatures are the move. They don't look pretty, but they help you stay out of spam, are just things to be mindful of. And then IU count. I think most of us know we shouldn't do this. It's an easy bad pattern to fall into. Literally go through your email and just count how many times you say I, our, we, ours, etc. versus you. One of the simplest moves you can make is just try to pull out all of the I's in your email. Even if you're like as silly and stupid as like I'm following up, just kill I'm following up. Like we don't need it. And often we write in these like really professional wordy sentences. It's not a 10th grade history paper. And frankly, like that's how most of us were taught to write. So it's why we write like that in emails. The last two, I'd love to. Again, when I review emails, I cannot tell you how many times I hear people saying, I'd love to. That is cool if you know the person. If you don't know the person, they don't give a rat's ass what you'd love to do. Kill it. It sounds self-centered. It's not intended to be that way. But when I went through my emails and I looked at it, I was doing it all the time. It just sounds almost kind of fake, really, even though it's not intended to be that way. And then on that same vein, I think you'll find this valuable. Another really common pattern, nobody cares what we think. We haven't earned that right yet, right? Our job is to get someone to believe that we have something interesting, helpful, smart to say. We have to earn that privilege. Saying I think you'll find this valuable when we're a complete stranger just doesn't land the punch. So look, a couple things to look for in your emails. All right. Let me just do a time check. You're doing good on time. So based on all of that, this is an email that I took out, so you can't see who it's from, but it was from another cold email session that I did. Normally, when I run these for companies, I will have every seller submit a cold email, and then I'll pull in those examples as I'm teaching. But since this is a bunch of different companies, we couldn't do that today. But in my last class, I did this. This is someone who met someone briefly at an event, and their goal is to get a meeting with them. But there's a lot of things we see that we just learned we shouldn't do, right? Following up from supply side west. Too many words. Beginning. Hi, Slimane. We don't even need it. If we're truly sending an email to one person, you can eat up 2 words of your preview text just with hi name. Kill it. They know if they're the only person on the email, it's for them. We don't need to over-explain it. It was a pleasure connecting with you at supply side last week. I wanted to touch base. Another common term that we see a lot. We get all immediately go into selling our mode. Then we're looking for time. And it's long. This is just an easy email to delete. We're going to actually rewrite this later. I did a quick rewrite of this, but this is how I want everybody to start looking at their emails. Look at it with this critical eye. We're saying, I'm going to test some of these things and look for them in my own emails and rewrite it without doing those things. It's something super easy every single person can do today. Now, second piece here is I mentioned I spent most of my career in the sales effectiveness space. It is so sad to see how infrequently sellers, AMs, SDRs are exposed to what buyers are doing. And I think that often leads to us just taking our best guess. So this is a piece of research that I saw back in 2020 that completely changed my entire theory of what I was supposed to be doing as a salesperson. This is research from Gartner, which basically tells us, without getting into the nitty-gritty of it, that 83% of the buying group's time is spent without sellers. Now, if you're looking at that saying, well, I still get 17%, that ain't bad. That is all suppliers across all categories of spend on that problem that they are thinking about. You can look at this and you can say, how do I make my piece of the 17% bigger? Or we can look at this and say, there are far more learners out there than there are buyers. If someone's researching independently online or researching independently offline, they're learning. And so if I don't come into the equation until they're ready to buy something, well, guess what? I better hope I have the cheapest product on the market. I am completely differentiated and I've got an in with that company. Otherwise, it is going to be an uphill battle. So my philosophy here is most of us use cold email to pitch our solutions. And we do it through every available channel like DMs, calls, gifting, emails. This is why people get so turned off to cold email. It's because we're pitching something before we've identified that there's a problem worth solving. And we're also not being helpful to buyers who are not yet at the mode of being ready to evaluate a solution. But the good news is, if we can find a way to get in earlier, we have the potential to shape their demand in our favor. If we help them learn with us, we're not running the risk of them learning from our competitors or some other site that's skewed towards a different solution. And so I think it's important to consider, when buyers are in learning mode, what are they looking to learn about? Because these present opportunities for us to send emails that are helpful on things other than how great our solution is. Example number one, do I have a problem? This is the most popular question that buyers are thinking about. We all know we have pains, plenty of pains, but do I actually have a problem here? Helping your organization or helping your prospect validate whether or not they actually have a problem to begin with. Number two, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you know I talk about cost of inaction all of the time. Buyers don't just like run solutions up the flagpole all the time. They have to look at that problem and say, this problem is so big that it's actually costing me more not to solve it than it will cost me the risk of solving it. So helping your buyers size the pain calculators, things like that, giving them benchmarks to be able to understand, how bad on this scale am I? Number three, this has been our reality in 2023. Can I get away with ignoring it for now? Like, this is the unfortunate circumstance. We get a lot of buyers, particularly this year, who are like super interested in the beginning. And then when they see how much work goes into fixing it, they're like, nah, maybe it wasn't that big of a problem to begin with. So buyers are actively looking at, what are the negative consequences if I don't act? Last and finally, it's like, okay, if I pass through all of those, then what are my options? But again, what I will say is, the vast majority of cold emails spend time here and just one sliver of here, right? Not even looking at, outside of our solution or our category of spend, what are other ways executives have solved this problem? So the more we align to these questions, the more we think about, what insight do we have that can be helpful to a buyer who is in stage 1, 2, 3, 4, the more we become aides and kind of Sherpas, as creepy as that word is, as opposed to like a sales rep who just wants to book a meeting. And so the way that I do this, I wanted to make this super simple and just break down a simple framework. I call this observation hunting. So observation hunting is just a forcing mechanism for us to say, if I am going to send an email to a particular target account or a target segment. So some of you, I appreciate, maybe selling into SMB. You can't afford to send one-to-one emails to everybody. I have to have something I saw, a trigger I observed about that company or that industry, that segment, and then a hypothesized problem that you see underlined and put in red might be occurring as a result. This is that unsure tonality. And again, if we step back and reconsider our beliefs and assumptions around what we're using cold email to do, my personal belief is our job is to create curiosity on the problem, not curiosity on the solution just yet. It's just putting the cart ahead of the horse, and it makes it really hard to show up to a first call and have a true discovery conversation if we've just talked all about our solution and then someone's like, I just want to see it, right? So if we really want the opportunity to get in depth and have a true strategic discussion, we have to be the ones to open that door when we're setting up the tone for our meeting. And so it does not mean that you can never talk about your solution, but we're trying to lead someone to it, not with it. So here's how I do it. So one, and this actually sounds super simple, it's a little bit harder. I find that a lot of companies don't do this for their sellers. First, we got to say, like, what are the actual true business problems customers use us to solve? Like, when I was selling Challenger, my answer to that question would have been like, to improve their sales training. That's a surface level thing. That is not a true business. Nobody's business is dependent on like improving their training. But if I looked at something like reduce the number of forecasted deals that push out in the last week of the quarter, that is a business problem, right? Because the implications of that happening are severe and very, very painful. So in many ways, this is an exercise in saying, like, what is the actual business problem that we are solving here? Which then allows you to say, what are potential, events, triggers, signals that suggest someone might be having that problem? So when I was at my last company at Lavender, you could look at a company, for example, that had laid off a big portion of their SDR team. And you could say, like, it might be that they weren't seeing enough net new meetings to sustain the investment in an SDR motion. It's not always going to be the case. That's why we use the language of might, not you are. And then we reflect and say, now let me look at all of my top priority accounts. Do I actually see evidence of any of these observations? And I will tell you, when I started doing this, what I realized about my own approach was I was getting allured by like big, sexy names, logos, like sales team sizes. So there was a healthcare company I chased for 3 years. 3 years I chased this company and never got a meeting with them because there was no evidence that they had the problem that we solved for. And so in many ways, like if I think about demographic segmentation of your territory, like, number of employees, revenue size, things like that, those are often great measures to eliminate bad fits. But I think as sellers, we tend to be overconfident that those will help us see good fits. Really what we're looking for is evidence of the problem. So that's as simple as that. That's what observation hunting is. This is an example of an email that brings that to life. It's not pitching a solution, it's prompting a problem to see if we get a bite back. And so you can see here, super boring, simple subject line, Acme community. Notice I don't say hi, Jen, or any of that. Just noticed you're 6 months into your community job at Acme. Couldn't find a community for Acme's users. Are you weighing the pros and cons for building one? This other company was in a similar solution. Want to take out what they use to help them decide. I am not pitching any solution here. I'm simply standing as an outsider saying, I see 1 + 1 and it's equaling 3, not 2. And so I think maybe it's possible you might be stuck here. And I want to give you something that's helpful to help you decide. This is one of the ways that we earn trust with buyers because we're not trying to sell something before a problem is established. I had someone when I first started at my last company send me a note like this, and it was by far the email that stood out to me the most because it felt to me like this is someone who not only has taken a vested interest in me and my company, but wanted to be helpful before they wanted me to sell something. So I'm not saying this is the world's best cold email. I want to give you an example of what it looks and sound like when we just don't make it all about our solution. Okay, so let's do a quick rewrite. This is the same email we looked at before. And again, what I want to be so clear on is I'm not saying my rewrite is the best cold email in the world. We can still pick it apart, but I want to show you how we apply some of these themes. Take a look at this one. We already touched on it a little bit. This is how I rewrote it. So I made the subject line really stupid simple, product samples. Basically, it looks like this company is trying to sell a way to automate product samples instead of like physically packaging them up after a trade show. So my opener is, looks like you might have a lot of sample receipts coming out of the Supply Side West show. Not sure if you're looking for ideas to reduce the cost time to deliver on those. That's unsure tonality. Alpha was in a similar situation after beta show. They stopped manually processing. It freed up 18 hours of sellers' time post-event. Open to seeing how. Notice that's not like a call to action oriented around getting a meeting. I'm just seeing, is this something you're open to learning about? Now, I think there is this fear, I certainly felt it as a seller, that if we don't ask for the time, we won't get the time. That is totally, totally not true. People will give you time if they believe you can help them. So we do not have to be the ones to ask it. If someone said, yeah, I would like to stop doing this stuff manually, they'll be like, yeah, let's talk. So we don't always have to be the ones to say it. Now, you could make this email better and add a PS and saying something like, loved meeting you on Thursday at the show. I just chose not to keep the email short and sweet. I can always do that in the second email. It's not always guaranteed that they'll follow up on the first one. So just an example of taking a big, high effort email and condensing it down. The last thing I will say is if you are like an account manager, you send plenty of cold emails too. Maybe you've got a new contact, new sponsor, things like that. One of the things I also see, and I used to do myself, is like we dance around and ask. So like, I was hoping you might be available, after the first week of November. Not sure if this would work or if that would work, or just stop that. Like, get to the point. We don't have to dance around. Usually we do that when we are uncomfortable asking a question. I promise you, you do not come across rude if you are direct. You come across as friendly because they appreciate that you recognize how they like to consume information. So I'm going to hold this up for a second, and I'm going to open up the Q&A and see if anyone was brave enough to submit a cold email in the time that we have left. What you see on the left is my link tree. So if you scan the QR code, it's going to take you to a site that has a ton of free resources. Nothing is gated, it's all open. One of the things that has been very important to me as a salesperson is, like I said, I spent 18 years as a salesperson. I've made every mistake in the book. It's always been very important to me to share back those mistakes, things I've learned, assumptions I had, beliefs I had, and teach different ways of doing things. Everything I have in here is meant to be helpful to sellers, SDRs, managers, people who operate in sales and marketing. So if you are having one of those years where you're like, oh, I just feel so stuck, my hope is accessing some of this content, which is again free, ungated, will be helpful for you. And the last thing I'll say before I pull up the Q&A is, if you liked this, and if others in your organization are struggling with cold email, one of the services that I provide through DemandJen are these cold email workshops where everybody submits a cold email in advance. And instead of just teaching you the concepts, I'm using those submitted emails to demonstrate it. We rewrite it, and then we book meetings. And I'm really pleased to say that in every one of those that I've run for organizations, they've been able to land some really cool meetings. So if that is of interest to you or anybody in your team, my email's there. Or if you have questions about what was covered today, you want the slides, any of that good stuff, hit me up, jen@demandjen.com. Okay, now that that little sales pitch is over, let's go in the Q&A. Look at this. I love this. Justin Leonard. I think you might be the Justin Leonard that I used to work with. I love seeing your name up here. Okay. Dear Jason, I hope this message finds you well. My name is XXX. I'm the founder and managing partner of XXX, a minority-owned ESG advisory and strategy firm based in blank. Came across your ESG work as part of our ongoing industry research. Okay. Now, first of all, thank you for submitting this. Like I said, my role here is not to criticize anybody's email. It's just to help incorporate things that we've learned. Dear Jason sounds like a love letter from my long lost lover that sent me a message in a bottle. It's too formal for an email, right? Our executives don't use it. We don't have to use it. So kill Dear Jason, unless it is truly your long lost lover in a message in a bottle. Hope it finds you well. We've already decided we don't need it. We know we're good people. We take the faith, right? It's just going to make us sound like everybody else. My name is, they can find out what my name is and what my role is at the bottom of the email in our signature. This is just eating up all of our preview text. I came across your. This is the first time we're seeing the word your in this email. So this is a great example of something I used to do all the time. It would be like I. This is just over narrating something. What I might recommend instead is, if you truly did come across their ESG work, this might be a place to use CEO comments, right? If they were highlighting it in their investor presentations, you could say like Brian Jones comments, and then Brian spoke about how the organization doubled their, I don't know, carbon footprint reduction. Clearly, I don't know anything about this space. But by doing that, instead of like the unlikeliness of getting this email open, you're basically showing them, I've watched or read or chat GPT, it doesn't really matter. You did it. I've looked at your investor presentation, and I'm reaching out to you for that reason. So the hook of the email is about them, not about us. So Justin, thank you for submitting this. This is a great example of an email. All right. Do we have another? All right. Hi, name there. Zero denying 40 in-depth customer case studies on X website is impressive. Still, other CS directors tell me they often struggle to get customers to voice satisfaction or find appropriate use cases for conversations with clients. So this is a great example of a place where you have a great observation. Like, this tells me you've actually looked at my website, and I love that. And I love the fact that you didn't say, I spent time looking at you stated the fact. That's a perfect illustration of that. However, this is a little bit of an issue with tone, right? So right now, the feeling that I get when reading this is you are talking at me. There is zero denying 40 in-depth customer case studies is impressive. Still, other people tell me they struggle to get customers to voice satisfaction. What this requires someone to do when they reply to this is raise their hand up and say, yeah, I struggle. That is really not something humans do with strangers. So instead, if we remove like the word struggle, or we remove other people tell me, phrase it in looking at, I don't know, looking at your team. I see maybe you've got a, I don't know, 4-person marketing team. Imagine it's pretty tough to constantly refresh case studies when you also have this, this, and this on the team's plate? Like, make it to the extent that you can. If you've already looked at their website, you've already shown that you're doing research, make it a little bit more empathetic. Like, I can relate. Like, everybody loves to have the most up-to-date case studies ever, but it's probably hard given this. That is a problem prompter. And you can say, like, not sure if you're seeing that. And someone will often correct you because you're asking to be corrected instead of stating it as a fact. So tone would be the one area I would work on with this one. Hannah, thank you so much for sharing that and for having an awesome, badass observation in there. All right. Do we have any more? I love this. This is why I love women in sales. Hi, first name. All right, we can kill that right off the bat, right? Okay, trying my best to stand out in your inbox. So I'm sharing this custom walkthrough about how we can help you predict and prevent costly escalations at company. Insert video open to looking for more. All right, Melanie, I love the intent behind this message. However, when we say things like trying my best to stand out in your inbox, other things we say are like, not sure if you've seen my messages. I hate to be a bother. Those things actually tell someone, I've heard from this person before and I've already made the decision not to read it or reply to it. So this probably isn't worth my time. Kill that. We don't need to do that, right? Instead, what I might say is, again, one, with videos, it can be risky. Sometimes I like to send an email that prompts the video. And then if you get a yes, then send the video just so you're not worried about spam filters and things like that. But what I might do is actually create curiosity for them to open the video. So we might say something like, noticed there's a reason you're reaching out to them. So notice this observation. There's one thing that most executives underappreciate costs them, time, money, whatever the right metric is in solving for that. And then what we're doing again is we're creating that curiosity loop. Like, you're making someone say like, well, what is that one thing? I want to see the one thing. So you encourage them to click the video. But I do like the intention here of saying like, I'm going to do something custom for you. Okay. 3 more minutes. I think we might be all right. Good on the chat. So first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for submitting your emails. Thank you so much for choosing to be here today. Like, developing yourself and choosing to unlearn things is a choice, and I commend it. For those of you, by the way, I forgot to say this in the beginning. For those of you who are not in the Women in Sales Slack group, Alexine probably dropped it, but maybe I'll drop it again. This is such an awesome, badass community. There's channels for job seekers. There's channels for like, I've got this really uncomfortable question I don't really know how to ask my boss, or I'm trying to negotiate and I don't know what I'm doing. Like, all things that, looking back on my career, I was lucky to work with some incredible female managers. Not everybody has that. So it's a perfect place to really lean on true community. Plus, then you find out about other events like this, which Alexine does just such an awesome job of putting on. So with that, we've got 2 minutes left, but I know everybody has stuff to do. It's the end of November. Thank you so much for being here. It was a true joy to be with you today.